All right, well, good morning. Thanks for coming. And so this is actually part of a two-part. I want to do this week and next week kind of connected. And it came out this idea for me about exploring the value of boredom. And is there any value in being bored? There were some studies released recently that talk about how, with all the social media and stuff, we just get, we lose the opportunity to be bored. And we're missing out on things in our life. And so next week I'm going to explore kind of that end of it, the idea of, well, where are the benefits of boredom? And so this week is that's the yang, and so this week is the yin of being useful. And the new church and all of Swedenborg's works talk a lot about being useful, and that it's really important to be useful in life. And so I wanted to start with a little bit of history on this, because the new church did not invent this idea that we should be useful. This isn't unique to the new church. But how it kind of develops is I think it's interesting, because if you roll back a couple thousand years to the Jewish church, well, how did you get close to God? It was through the tabernacle. And the temple and the sacrifices. You wanted to experience God in your life. There weren't a whole lot of options for it. You'd bring your offerings to the tabernacle, the temple. They would sacrifice them. They'd maybe anoint you with some oil. You might eat some holy bread if you're of the Levi clan. But there weren't a whole lot of ways to experience God. Prophets wanted to experience God. But when they did, they often found that it was more than they could handle. They'd be like, yeah, I want to experience you. I want to experience God. But as soon as God shows up, bam, they're on their knees. They're on the ground saying, oh, no, I'm undone. It's too much. Despite that, we still want to experience God. And so when the Catholic Church evolves in the 1st and 2nd centuries after the Lord's born, they kind of take a different approach to experiencing God. It still revolves around coming to a temple, a church. You want to experience God? You want to experience holiness? You come and you do these rituals. You say some prayers, you do some activities, and you have experienced God in your life. And the church kind of controlled how you could experience God. But that's how you did it. You came to the church and you had your experience of holiness. Well, in the 1500s, Martin Luther comes along and he really upends the whole thing. He says, okay, faith is separate from works and all this other theological stuff that we're probably familiar with. But one of the keys to Luther's view of holiness is that you don't have to go to church for it. You don't have to go to a temple. You don't have to sacrifice things. If you want to feel connected to God, you go out and do things. You go out and be useful. His basic thing was, God gives everybody gifts. And if you want to be a good steward of the gifts that God gives you, you go out and use them. So there's a lot of stuff we disagree with Martin Luther on, but on this, we're on pretty good, ground here. Because Luther's like, yep, you have a God-centered life. And out of Luther comes the Puritan movement in Europe. And when the Puritans found that Europe was not good enough for them, they decided to double down and go to America. And we're going to be really good Puritans. We're going to do everything according to God's word. And we are going to be useful. Useful. Because nothing good comes out of sitting around doing nothing. And they could pull out some scriptures to kind of back up their point. I've got a few of them here for you to kind of take a look. We'll read through them to give you an idea of how the Puritans took things. From Proverbs chapter 19, laziness casts one into deep sleep, and an idle person will suffer hunger. You can kind of feel the Middle Ages just shaking there. Oh, you naughty sinner. Proverbs 6, verses 6 to 11. Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise, which having no captain, overseer, or ruler, provides her supplies in the summer, and gathers her food in the harvest. How long will you slumber, O sluggard? When will you rise from your sleep? A little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep. So shall your poverty come on you like a prowler, and in your need like an armed man. It's not exactly cheerful stuff, you know, a little sleep, a little slumber, and all of a sudden, bang, poverty and need's going to come all over you. So the Puritan movement was, you've got to be useful all the time. Go, go, go. One of the famous kind of reverends of the Puritan movement, Richard Baxter, you know, he would go out and implore people to put on signs over the doors, the archways of the doors that says, my eternity depends on the time I spend in this shop. So people come in there and they go, this guy is working his tail off because he knows his eternal welfare depends on the work that he's doing. So, I mean, Luther and the Puritans, they had something right about this, in that there is this holiness in being a good steward of the gifts that we are given. But it's not about being guilt-ridden about it. And that's where it kind of goes, you know, it's almost like a Cain kills Abel type situation all over again, where we can be feeling bad about ourselves because, a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding my hands, and all of a sudden here comes all the bad stuff. I've failed God, I've failed my community, I've failed my neighbor. People get guilty about this because they feel like they're not working 24/7. 1 Timothy gives us a similar kind of feel, you know, and besides, widows learn to be idle, wandering about from house to house, and not only idle, but also gossips and busybodies, saying things which they ought not. I suppose that applies to people other than widows, but that's what he was singling out in that thing. And it's the idea that, you know, as you become idle, you know, bad thoughts come into your head. And I think we've experienced that, you know, right? You're sitting around, you're bored, and eventually you get those thoughts, oh boy, you're not really very good at this. Oh, I bet that didn't go so well. You know, oh, this isn't working out for you. Which is why we're being told again in Peter, be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Resist him, standing firm in the faith, because you know that the family of believers throughout the world is undergoing the same kind of sufferings. So the Puritans kind of thought that, okay, if I'm suffering, this is good, because that means I'm doing the work of the Lord. You know, I'm resisting and I'm suffering, and this is where it's at. And the more I suffer, boy, this must be good for me. Must be good for me. I'm suffering. It's not what I think the new church is trying to tell us about usefulness. And I give you this kind of setup because you'll see as we look at how the new church sees usefulness, you know, it's taking a little bit from the Catholics, a little bit from the Puritans, and a little bit from the Lord. And he says, okay, let's use the teachings from the Lord to kind of mold this and make this right. Because usefulness isn't always how we perceive it. It's Lord's definition of useful might be a little bit different. And we get this basis from Genesis chapter 9. Swedenborg's talking about use in regards to the Noah's Ark story. It's the very end of the story. The rainbows happened, and here's what happens. It says, then God blessed Noah and his sons, saying to them, be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth. The fear and dread of you will fall on all the beasts of the earth, and on all the birds of the sky, and on every creature that moves along the ground, and on all the fish of the sea. They are given into your hands. Everything that lives and moves about will be food for you. Just as I gave you the green plants, I now give you everything. So it's a reference back to the Adam and Eve story, saying, all right, at that point, Adam and Eve had all the plants, but now you got it all. Secrets of Heaven says, number 997, says the following about those verses. It's being given all to you means enjoyment on account of use, which is for food. For whatever is given for food is for use. as regards use, the situation is this. People who are governed by charity, that is, who dwell in love towards the neighbor, from which love the living delight contained in pleasures derives, have no regard for the enjoyment of pleasures, except on account of the use that is served. For charity does not exist if there are no works of charity. It is in the exercise of it, that is, in use, that charity consists. Someone who loves the neighbor as himself never experiences the delight of charity except in the exercise of it, or in use. Consequently, the life of charity is a life of uses. Such life pervades the whole of heaven, the Lord's kingdom being a kingdom of mutual love. It's a kingdom of uses. Every pleasure, therefore, that springs from charity finds its delight in use, and the more preeminent the use, the greater the delight. For this reason, it is the very being and nature of a use which determines the happiness that angels have from the Lord. So a couple things to pick up out of this. Food is about usefulness. So we derive pleasure from food, and the Lord says, that's great. Every sense that you have is given to you for usefulness. So you're going to have food, that's delight, great, enjoy the food. Now go up and do something with the nutrition, the energy that I've given you. Be productive with it. Oh, and it applies to all the senses. I've given you something beautiful to look at. Okay, great. You enjoy looking at things? Go do something useful with the sight I've given to you. When you see food throughout Scripture, though, you can think about it's referencing a use. But I think what a lot of times people get hung up on this passage is it talks about the more preeminent the use, the greater the delight. And I think sometimes our earthly concepts of what usefulness is messes with us. Because we think preeminent. And well, who's preeminent in the world? Politicians, power brokers, people who've got lots of money. Oh, preeminent. Okay, I need to do something like that. But when we look around the teachings for the new church, it says the greatest use of all is having children. It's the greatest use. Having a family, raising children. And I can think of many a mom who goes through life thinking they're not being useful. And it's like, no, that's the opposite. Everything that the new church says is that it's the opposite. That being a mom and raising a family is the most useful thing. Counts for dads too, I think. Being a dad and who helps out and raises kids. I mean, hey, it's the greatest use of it all. It's populating the heavens. But so many people, particularly my experience is more women feel bad about, not working or not doing enough because, hey, I know I'm not doing what the world says. But this says no. The greatest delight is in that. And when you think about it, those of us who've had the experience of raising a child, I mean, hey, it can be a lot of fun. It's fun to see your kids grow up. It's fun to raise them along the way. And yes, they drive you crazy at times and they're expensive. But, boy, it's useful. It's useful. They go out and do their own thing and become their own person, and they populate the heavens even further. It's useful. Everything has this end towards it. Everything has this goal of being something more useful. And the caution we get in the next number, 1472, is that you got to just be careful not to get hung up in the means. He's talking here about the delight we have in learning. He says, with others, that strong desire causes them to take delight solely in knowledge comprised of cognitions. Cognitions could be translated as like memory knowledge, book kind of knowledge, without any other end in view. Yet that knowledge is nothing else than a certain means that exists to achieve an end, which is a use. That is to say, cognitions, memory knowledges, book knowledge exist to serve as vessels for celestial and spiritual things. And when they are performing that service, for the first time they have a use, and from that use receive their delight. I think we've had experience, we've had courses, all of us have been in school for something. You say, all right, I'm going to set out to take a course, and I'm going to learn how to do whatever. You've been doing horticulture stuff. And for him, the delight's going to be, hey, when I get a job and I can use this. There's fun along the way to learn the stuff. But the real joy is, hey, look at this garden I created. I have the knowledge now. Look at what I've now done. That's the real happiness. And, it's easy in the world today to be acquiring knowledge. Sit there on YouTube and watch videos all day long. I've done it, and I can learn all sorts of stuff. But the real joy is going out and doing something, being useful with it. You think about it, the Lord could do everything for us, right? He could just snap his fingers and everything could run. He doesn't need us. He doesn't need us to do the work. But he lets us do it. And the teachings tell us, hey, the Lord gives the angels things to do because it's useful. And they enjoy it. The Lord can employ the angels to go out there and do things, and they'll have a good time doing it. That's the whole point. He's trying to bless us and say, look, the greatest happiness you're ever going to find is in doing things. It's as simple as that. There are plenty of stories out there we've found. You don't need to be a theologian to get that. We can find that people have built up a business and it's worth a lot of money, and they're 45 and they retire. Or they're a professional athlete and they're 40 and they go, I'm the king of the hill. I'm retiring. My skills are declining. I've got my millions of dollars. I'm going to go out and play golf. And they're miserable. They're absolutely miserable. This one guy wrote a story about that. Sold his business, had lots of money. 6 months later, he picks up work again. He says, those 6 months of unemployment were the worst months of my life. Absolutely the worst. And so Swedenborg has plenty of accounts that we've come across in his writings that say, yeah, many people came to heaven in the next life thinking that idleness was going to be their delight. And they soon found, when they were given all the idleness they could handle, that they were not happy at all. So we need to be useful. But hard work doesn't have to be drudgery. And that's kind of that Puritan influence. It doesn't have to be no fun. You can enjoy being useful. You can enjoy going out and doing things. All the requirement is you take the skills and the talents and the gifts that you have and do something with them. That's all. The phrase that we're probably familiar with is Swedenborg writes, go out and do your job honestly, justly, and faithfully. That's it. That's being useful. It's sharing your gifts with other people. It doesn't take a lot of work, or not in the Puritan way, but when you do this, that is the holiness. That is spreading the holiness. That is being close to God because you're using the stuff he gave you. And the image that we have is that there's this light coming from heaven, reaching kind of the higher parts of our minds, is reaching down the lower part. And the way we kind of can connect to that is by doing our work. When the natural side of us is turning towards God and doing the things that he's asking us to do, it's like that part of our mind opens up and this light from heaven comes down and connects. It's the image that the writings give us. If you want to be experiencing God in your life, that's all you've got to do. Take the talents you've got, take the skills that you have, and do them. Use them honestly, justly, and faithfully. Amen.